from XRS Corporation. You have joined the XataNet 395.3 Regulatory Compliance webinar. Today we're going to go through a series of slides that discuss the rules, how XataNet is going to be implementing those rule changes, and discuss some of the impacts that might be occurring within your organization because of those changes. So the first thing we want to discuss is actually what these changes are. So in February 2013, so this February, it was passed that drivers may be able to use off-duty time within the vehicle. So parking the vehicle and using the vehicle for off-duty, sitting in the parked vehicle. The reason for this being that drivers no longer have to be on duty while they are in the vehicle. Drivers can take their breaks, take their lunch, take that time within the vehicle and mark it as off. This is mostly just an allowance. Drivers can at least explain why they're in the cabin off-duty now. It is allowed. And one of the big reasons for this is the 30-minute break, which we're going to address here in just a moment. But now if a driver is in the vehicle, they can legally be in an off-duty status. Also, a co-driver can be sitting in the passenger seat while the vehicle is in motion and use that time as off-duty as well. There are a lot of conditions around that, but the idea behind this is that a co-driver doesn't have to be sitting in the berth in order to be accruing time for their reset. They can actually sit in the passenger seat, not be working. This is a big deal for a lot of the long-haul drivers, obviously team drivers having a co-driver, but having that co-driver be able to sit in that passenger seat and take that time as off-duty so that they're not having to take that full time in the sleeper berth. Now, the conditions around this are that it has to be less than 2 hours, a total of 2 hours, and has to be adjacent to a sleeper berth status. So you can't have your teams that are in a day cab run this. They would have to be in a sleeper berth vehicle, and that co-driver would have to have that time adjacent to a sleeper berth segment of 8 hours or more, and we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. Now in July 1st, there are some new regulations that are being required of the drivers. So the first one mentioned here is the 30-minute required off-duty break. This 30-minute off-duty break is a requirement of all drivers carrying a CDL, and that has to be 30 minutes of consecutive off-duty time. This 8-hour amount of time is the combination of daily duty, daily drive. So when a driver logs on duty, he would have to take that 30-minute off-duty break within those first 8 hours of the day before they can continue to drive. This does not become a violation until they actually drive without having taken the break. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the system's handling that and what your drivers can expect. The next item is that the weekly reset, the 34-hour reset, must include 2 full periods of 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. And this is really important, and many of you, I'm sure, have been looking at ways in order to implement this into your organization, because this can create a major issue. So if your driver runs out of hours after 1 a.m., this reset could be significantly longer than 34 hours. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in some detail here in just a moment. The other piece of the 34-hour reset change is that it can only be taken once every 168 hours. So there has to be 7 complete calendar days in between the beginning of each 34-hour reset. Driver cannot possibly take a 34-hour reset in less than 168 hours since the beginning of his last weekly reset. So for the weekly operations, or the Monday through Friday, Monday through Saturday, or those who might run the 78 rule might run into more issues than those who run the 67 rule. But again, it comes down to making sure that this reset happens only once every 168 hours. So the business impact here is that obviously it's going to be different for everybody, depending on your operations, when your shifts begin. If you run multiple shifts, obviously if you don't have teams and you don't have sleeper berths, you don't run into that off-duty in the passenger seat for your co-drivers. But everybody's going to run into the 34-hour reset situation. So consideration should be given for overnight drivers, these line haul drivers, these long haul drivers that need to take these resets. And sometimes they might not have a load and might not have a job to go run, and would get 34 hours of consecutive off-duty time, but it could not be considered as a reset. Again, it has to be 168 hours since the beginning of the last one. The other piece of this is, like I mentioned before, with the two complete 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. sections within that reset. Again, if a driver runs out of time at 1 a.m. or after 1 a.m., you have to consider that in order for that driver to get that full reset, he would have to get to the next day 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., and that 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. would be the first, and then he'd go another 24 hours to get to the next 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., and he wouldn't be able to come off of his reset until 5 a.m., essentially 2 days later. So that can be as high as 52 hours of consecutive off-duty time to get a valid reset. Again, it's going to come down to if drivers are running out of time before 1 o'clock, that's going to be optimal. If they run out of time between 1 a.m. and I think roughly 2 p.m., that's when you're going to run into a situation in which that 34-hour reset will be longer than 34 hours because, again, they have to get 2 complete 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. off-duty segments in that reset. Like we mentioned before, off-duty in the parked vehicle is actually a benefit to drivers. So as we talk about that 30-minute break that the drivers are required to take, they no longer have to be outside of the vehicle. They don't have to be taking a lunch. They don't have to be doing something other than sitting in the cab, taking their lunch, taking their break. But it is something that is allowed. It's a benefit for the drivers. Some drivers may have already been doing it, been getting away with it. Now it's just a situation in which it is allowed anyway. As we talk about the co-driver and passenger seat rule, a co-driver is allowed to have 2 hours off-duty in the passenger seat. And it has to be, like I mentioned before, adjacent to a sleeper berth segment of 8 hours or greater, but less than 10 hours, because a 10-hour sleeper berth segment would be a full reset. And so those 2 hours have to be adjacent to the sleeper berth. It can be split. So we were one of many companies to petition the FMCSA for clarification on this, and it doesn't have to be a single 2-hour segment. It can be split before and after the sleeper berth segment. In a lot of ways, that might be very helpful in terms of getting 10 consecutive hours for a daily reset. But it allows them to be, for example, 1 hour of off-duty in the passenger seat, 8 hours in the sleeper berth, and then another hour of off-duty in the passenger seat. That would be 10 hours, but it would be acceptable because both of those off-duty status segments in the passenger seat were adjacent to the sleeper berth segment. The break of 30 minutes for 8 hours of consecutive on duty, this is interesting because if the driver takes it early enough in the day, they may actually be required to take 2 of them throughout the course of the day. So if they take it in the first few hours of the day, maybe within 4 hours or 5 hours, that driver will be required to take another one before his 11 hours of drive or his 14 hours of duty would be up. potentially. So just keeping that in mind. There are some labor rules, labor work rules in California that have already been in place for several years about drivers having to take these breaks at certain times in the day. Those California work rules, if the drivers are following those rules, they would satisfy the federal rules that are listed here in the required break. So just keeping in mind, again, if drivers do take this break early enough in the day, they may end up being required to take another one. And the counters in the system will keep that in mind, and we'll definitely show that. And we'll take a look at that here when we get into the actual solutions support of the rules. So a co-driver taking 2 hours off in the passenger seat. Again, this may not apply to everybody, but for those who do have sleeper berth vehicles and have teams in those sleepers, again, this is an allowance for the driver, but there's so many requirements around it that it might take a little bit of practice to actually get used to what can and needs to be done. So the prior regulation was that if a co-driver is in the vehicle and sitting in the passenger seat, he has to be on. There's no questions about it, had to be on duty. And that's as of today. But on July 1st, that co-driver, like I mentioned before, can sit in that passenger seat and consider up to 2 hours of that time off duty, again, directly adjacent to a sleeper berth period of at least 8 hours. So the way that XataNet changes is that the driver, the co-driver, can put himself into an off-duty status. When the vehicle moves, it's not going to automatically move him to on-duty. It would keep him in off-duty, and it would flag that as off-duty in the passenger seat. Again, the primary driver has to be in a drive status in order for this to be flagged. So we allow up to 2 hours to be split before and after the 8-hour sleeper berth. Again, at least 8, but less than 10. If the 2-hour segment is met, so if it's the 2 hours up front or at the end of the sleeper berth, if we hit the 2-hour mark as we accumulate that time, the status will automatically be changed from off-duty to on. And we wrote to the FMCSA to confirm the allowance of this activity, and they gave us the permission to make that automatic duty status change. So if your driver is in the passenger seat, your co-driver is in the passenger seat, off-duty for an hour before, has his sleeper berth, and then has another hour in the passenger seat in an off-duty status, at 2 hours and 1 minute of accumulated off-duty in the passenger seat, the status will automatically change to on-duty. If the co-driver is off-duty in the passenger seat for a certain period of time without being adjacent to a sleeper berth of at least 8 hours. Let's say the sleeper berth is less than 8 hours. Or let's say that the co-driver in the passenger seat occurs, we've hit 2 hours before the driver gets into a sleeper berth status. What that ends up doing is it ends up invalidating the off-duty in the passenger seat, and it counts it as daily duty time and weekly duty time, because the regulations clearly state that in order for that off-duty status to be valid, it has to be adjacent to a sleeper berth status, a segment of 8 hours or greater. So just keeping that in mind, that that 8-hour segment in sleeper berth is an absolute requirement, and it has to be adjacent. Otherwise, the off-duty in the passenger seat is invalid, and it would be counted as daily duty and weekly duty, and may impact their resets. This does not change the split berth rule, so they can use this in addition to their split berth rule. So let's say a driver is in, a co-driver, is in the passenger seat off duty for an hour, and then they get 8 hours in the sleeper berth, which would be 9 hours, and then the co-driver becomes the primary driver and starts to drive the vehicle. They will have not gotten a full 10-hour reset. What they will have gotten is they would have gotten their long berth segment, and they will still have needed a 2-hour sleeper berth in order to get their reset. So keep that in mind, is that this doesn't create a reset just because they've used this rule. What it does is it allows them to get that reset if they accumulate the 10 hours, but it also allows them to use this in conjunction with their split berth rule. So just some things to keep in mind. Again, there are some significant learning steps as far as this is concerned, because again, the regulations are an allowance to the co-driver, but it can become a little bit sticky if the drivers are running into situations in which they come out of that sleeper berth early, or if they don't get the full 10-hour reset. They would still need that other segment. So how's 395.3 going to change the safety manager's process? So the web time clock, all the time clock applications for XataNet will display 2 new warnings if the driver does clock in before achieving the valid 34-hour reset. So if they try to clock in before getting 2 1 to 5 a.m. segments, or if they try to clock in before 168 hours has passed since the beginning of his last weekly reset. And so the driver will get a prompt when they try to clock in that says your weekly reset is not achieved. You can see in the red text there. Your weekly reset has not been achieved. You've not met the requirement of at least 2 off-duty periods of 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. So your driver will get that message if they try to clock in too soon. As well, if they try to do it without getting 168 hours since the previous weekly reset, again, they'll get that reasoning for what that is. So as you can see here, when a driver goes to clock in on the web-based time clock, they would see what their available on-duty time, their available drive time is. That's going to stay at 0 until we know that they've gotten 168 hours consecutive off-duty since the beginning of their last, 168 hours have passed since the beginning of their last valid weekly reset. From a driver's perspective, if a driver misses a break, so this is about the missed break rule. From a driver's perspective, a driver is going to get a warning as they approach those 8 hours. So if the driver hops behind the wheel, logs in, starts driving, makes their stop, starts doing their daily activities, and 8 hours has passed since the driver has had his last off-duty status of at least 30 minutes, he'll go into violation. Well, about a half an hour before that, so at 7 hours and 30 minutes, the driver will get a warning to let them know that they're approaching that break, that required break, and they will need to take it. So the on-screen warning for the driver is you're required to take a 30-minute break in 30 minutes or less. So at the 7 hour and 30-minute mark, this screen will be up on the display, whether it's the micro display or one of the color displays. That driver will get that warning, and that will stay on the screen until they hit OK. And then if the driver continues on and they exceed that 8 hours, they will then go into violation, and it will say you have missed your mandatory 30-minute break. If a driver is in a current drive status, this is the screen they would see. If they were on duty, maybe at a delivery, maybe at a pickup, doing some type of activity, maybe fueling, and they have not been off duty, when they come back into the cab, they would have this displayed on their screen as well. So it's not just a drive time screen. It is a screen that they would get to let them know that you've missed your 30-minute break. Again, it is only a moving violation, is only a drive time violation. So if they're on duty and they start their stop, let's say at the 7 hour and 45-minute mark, and they're at that stop for an hour, they're not in violation until they drive without the break. So they're going to need to take that break before departing that location, because departing that location will create a drive segment. It will create a violation. So they would need to potentially just move their vehicle out of the way, maybe clear the yard manager or the customer and make sure that they can take it there. And I think this is going to happen a lot of times with a lot of customers, and people are going to get used to that pretty quickly, that when these situations happen, there's going to be a lot of vehicles that are sitting around for a half an hour at your customers, especially when those of you who have very tight time windows and can't move them around, you will be running into that. And here's the violation. If the driver is in a drive status, then it will say you have missed your mandatory 30-minute break, and that again is the drive status window, the drive screen when he's in a violation of the missed break. The log will report this as well as your alerts. So the events and alerts in XataNet include violations as well as low drive time. Low drive time are based off of your 11-hour and 14-hour rules. So your federal rule set is what's going to dictate your low drive time. However, violations will take into account any violations. So whether it's your 16-hour big day, whether it's your exceeding 11 hours of drive, whether it's driving after your 14, or in this case, driving after a break has been missed, that will be in the alerts as well. And then the log will also include in the report the violation type. It will be listed in the violation reports as a new violation type as well. So here's an example. I think it's a little bit fuzzy there in that blue window, but there's an example of a driver who drove after his 8 hours of daily duty have been exceeded, and there you can see violation type daily drive. Again, it's a drive violation, but the type is missed break. The monthly log report will now have included its missed break type. So in the legend there's a new violation type called MB for missed break, and again, it would show the amount of time that drive occurred while in that violation type. Driver log violation report, again, this is going to be added. So now it's not just daily drive, daily duty, and weekly duty, as well as the 16-hour big day, but you've also got the new missed break item in that report as well. From a deployment of the new rule set, OBCs will be updated via mobile sync or over the air. So this will be done, and some of you may have already been taking some of this code in your mobiles, but again, it would be something that we will be pushing via the mobile sync or over-the-air updates. The OBCs will continue to use the hours of service that is currently in effect during the rollout of the update. So it's not as though once your ZAMs and X5s get this update that they'll immediately start using it. There is an effective date that is set in the host that determines when the OBC is going to implement that change. So even though it has taken or may be taking the update sooner, it doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be using those rules. It will be using the effective date that would be seen on the host or on the SAS side. So you can see that right here in the new settings. So today you'd have just the weekly rule set, enable the big day, enable oil field, and then the 2005 rule set changes that were implemented. What was that effective date? We will now be adding a few more fields here. One thing we're doing is in the federal weekly rule, we're renaming things. So instead of having new hours of service, old hours of service, and the question is always, why do you have the old hours of service in there? The old hours of service is what is still being used by passenger carrying operations. So they use the 10-hour and 15-hour rules. And so instead of calling them the new and the old, what we've done is we've clarified that and kept the 67 and the 78, which was new, and now it's just the federal rules for property carrying. The 67 and the 78 for passenger are now designated as such. You still have your 16-hour big day selection, your oil field enablement selection, and the 2005 rule set change. But now you've got as well the 2013 hours of service, effective date. And this will almost always be set to 7/1/2013. In some cases, you may have that date pushed sooner, but most people will be putting it for that date. As far as training is concerned, this webinar is one example. We will be doing another one in the first week of June, yet to be put on the calendar, but it will be available in the beginning of June as well. Also, new CAD cards are being put together and ready to be distributed. They are close to completion and will be available within the documentation very shortly within the XataNet host. But we will also be putting the online videos, such as the one we're doing right now, out there as well. So that, plus an overview of the rules and the changes, will be added to the documentation. So it is able to be pulled up whenever you need to. And that is it for the webinar piece. That is how XataNet is being updated to support the 395.3 rule set changes. And now we've got a few questions here that we want to go through. Looks like we've got maybe about 8 or so questions. And we will we'll touch on those, and then what we will do is, like I mentioned before, once these have been logged, they will go into an FAQ that we will distribute along with the link to where this video will be posted. So first question, the release notes. So there's a question about the release notes saying that I think I'm kind of reading between the lines here, but I would need to read the release notes. I don't have them in front of me right now, but it's in regards to the break rule. So the 8 hours is the rules state that the driver needs to take a 30-minute break of off-duty, so 30 minutes of consecutive off-duty, however, wherever they do it, but they need to do it within 8 hours of the last off-duty segment of 30 minutes or greater. So a daily reset, a weekly reset, obviously that's an off-duty status of greater than 30 minutes. So that's why that driver needs to take that within 8 hours of the start of their day. If they take it in the first couple of hours, again, 8 hours from the end of that break, you'd have to take another another 30-minute break. So if our documentation is stating that it's needed following 8 hours, it should state that the break is needed within 8 hours of that consecutive duty time, daily duty time. If the statement is about that they would be in violation after 8 hours, that would be correct. So again, I don't have the release notes in front of me, but we will need to review those to make sure that they are accurate. If there are some typos or some misleading items, we will get those updated and pushed out back into the documentation as quickly as possible. Another question looks like here, the 395.3 rule set changes do not impact oil field or passenger carrying rules. So no change to the 10-hour and 15-hour rule set or any of the requirements therein from 395.3. It is specific to only property carrying operations, as well as oil field. Oil field is not impacted by these changes either. When will there be a printout available of the slides? The printout of the slides, again, we will be putting these in a video format out into, again, I don't know exactly where we're going to be posting it, but we will be doing it very, very shortly. As soon as we are complete here, I will get the recording over to our documentation team and get it posted as soon as possible. As far as a hard copy of the slides, we will be putting that into our documentation as well, possibly into a different format, probably more into the FAQ type of format, so being able to give a little bit more detail around them. Probably won't necessarily be into the slides. There will be screenshots, though, so please be aware of that. I believe I may have missed a question here. So the release notes, again, state that a driver will get a warning. So the warning about the brake. So again, that happens 30 minutes prior to the driver reaching that violation for the missed brake. Next question is, when will the notes of the 34-hour reset being utilized show in the last 7 or 8 days in the remarks section? So I think the question is, I know sometimes it's hard to fit a long question into these small boxes, but the question of when will the notes of the 34-hour reset being utilized in the event multiple 34-hour resets show in the last 7 or 8 days. So if a driver tries to take a 34-hour reset less than 168 hours since the beginning of his last 34-hour reset, it will just count that time as a daily reset. It won't even give them the option to implement that. And again, this is something that we posed to the FMCSA to talk about and say, hey, this is a simple paper application when a driver gets to just choose what they want to take for their reset. But from an electronic logs perspective, this is considerable. This is a major change. And so what ends up happening is that the driver won't even get the ability to choose if that reset has occurred less than 168 hours since the end of his previous rule reset. So it won't even really show in the remarks section, and the driver will, if they're trying to log in early, just like in today, if they try to log in without available time, it will state that in the driver's login workflow. So they won't even be able to take it less than 168 hours since his last reset. There's a question here about why the new rule set change will affect people on 78 more than those running 67. I think I actually probably misstated that. I think it's probably the other way around. I think it's probably going to affect the those on the 67 rule set rather than those on the 78 rule set, because again, those that are running the 8 days a week, that already exceeds the 7 days in between your resets. But if you're running a 60-7 rule set, these drivers are going to potentially run into this a little bit more likely because, again, they're going to have to look at when they can come off of their reset. So think of it this way. If a driver goes off duty, let's say they begin their weekly reset in today's operation. Let's say they begin it on Friday afternoon. Maybe they're a Monday to Friday operation. Monday to Friday operations, that driver goes off duty Friday evening, whatever time it is. They don't come back till Monday morning. Now, that driver's reset today begins technically at the time he leaves work on Friday. The way that it's going to be implemented at July 1st is that the reset actually doesn't occur or doesn't even start ticking off until 168 hours have elapsed since the beginning of his last reset. So if his last reset occurred, let's say on Saturday or Sunday of the previous week, the off-duty time between when he went off duty until exactly 168 hours since the beginning of his last reset, that time will just be considered off. It won't account for anything. It will just be off duty. Then once we've hit the 168-hour mark, that's when the reset begins. So the problem there is, what if that time of day is after 1 a.m. or between 1 a.m. and 2 p.m.? I think that's the right calculation, is that if it occurs within then, keep in mind that driver may have to be off a little bit longer now because he hasn't gotten his 2 1 to 5 segments. So that's why this is really important, especially for those 60 to 7, I'm sorry, 60 and 7 rule sets rather than those with the 70 and 8. 70 and 8, you're already kind of eclipsing that 168 hours with your standard weekly reset. But those who are running 7-day rule set, those drivers do have to keep in mind when the beginning of their last valid reset occurred. So it's a little bit tricky in that, again, they have to work together. Has to be at least 168 hours and has to include 2 complete 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. off-duty segments. As far as error messages go, if they get a message it's too late to back out, today you can't back out. So if a driver gets an error message about a violation, you can't necessarily undo the violation. It just happens. So if a driver is getting a warning, that driver is just going to get the ability to say okay and stop the vehicle. But they're getting that notification that they will be going into violation if they continue on from that warning perspective. If they get an error message on, again, I'm trying to answer maybe 2 questions here, not knowing exactly what was asked. If it's a time clock error, that driver would essentially just get that okay, and if they continue to log in, they would be in violation. So they're getting that warning, that error message. Will there be a warning if the full 30 minutes is not taken? The answer to that is no. There is not a warning if the driver miscalculates his 30-minute break and he tries to come back on duty at 29 minutes. And this is a completely understandable question because, again, you've got a lot of you on this call, I know, run a very, very tight schedule. And it's only going to get more difficult now that you know you're taking the driver off the road for another 30 minutes every day. So in reality, your drivers really only will have 13 hours and a half hours to perform their activities. So for those who might be running those drivers much closer to the 14-hour mark, this is going to be a significant change. So knowing that, I know these drivers are going to be coming off of that break as close to 30 minutes as possible. It's just an off-duty status. It's not a break type. It's nothing other than just an off-duty status. So if you want, what might work well for you is within your host, within the configurations, put in a new delay type. And if you put in a delay type, they can at least say what the delay is. It's a break delay. And then they'll actually be able to see on the screen that they've hit a full 30 minutes. So that might be the best way to go about accomplishing this because, again, it's just an off-duty status, but we do have that timer, essentially, when it comes to a break. So it might be the best way to implement that. Let's see, what's the next one here? Does the 2 hours in the passenger seat count as part of the 14 if used in conjunction with the 8 sleeper? So if the driver is taking a 2 hours in the passenger seat, and then they have it adjacent to 8 hours in the sleeper berth, if the two combined account for less than 10 hours, he's not going to get a full 10-hour reset. That 2 hours in the passenger seat is technically considered to be daily duty time if you consider it as from a reset perspective. So if you want your drivers to get a reset, you might be best coaching them to say, okay, don't make your combination of these less than 10 hours. If you make it less than 10 hours, you will need another 2-hour sleeper berth segment. That off-duty in the passenger seat is valid. They don't have to be paid for that. So that's another thing to keep in mind is if they're on duty, that information might go into their payroll. or their time and attendance, however you capture that information. So just keep that in mind. But again, it might come down to being a coaching tool, is to say, if you're going to use this and you're already getting 8 hours in the sleeper because it's requiring you to because of this rule, don't make that combination less than 10 hours if at all possible. And we all know that there's going to be situations in which maybe a primary driver gets sick or he needs to be relieved for one reason or another that maybe wasn't predictable. And then that co-driver needs to get behind the wheel and maybe he invalidates some off-duty in the passenger seat. That stuff's going to happen, just like any other scenario that, again, it goes unplanned and might show up in the driver's log. Those are some things that, other issues like that, drivers driving beyond the rule set because of an emergency. Those are the kinds of things that again, happen today. This is just another situation in which, yeah, your driver might run into this. But again, if at all possible, try to get those two to combine to be 10 hours because then, again, you're getting that full reset. If a driver goes into violation and hits OK, will the driver screen show violation for the rest of the day? It only shows violation until that driver gets his break. So if the driver goes into violation for missing his break, hits OK, he'll stay in violation until he gets a 30-minute off-duty break. Once he gets that, he will have reset that timer. He won't be in violation anymore unless he's in violation of a different rule. So whether it's his weekly or his daily drive or daily duty, but the break rule will have been satisfied because he's taken the break. But until he takes that break, every minute of drive is going to be a violation because he still hasn't taken that 30-minute break. Next question. Will time clock application that we have installed in the PC need to be upgraded? I believe that the answer to that is yes. We will need to be pushing that out. I believe that is already done, and so we will need to get that deployed to those who are using the local time clock application. Those of you who are using it, please contact your client manager. If you don't have a client manager, please contact support, and we will work with you on getting that deployed. The 30-minute break, does it require that the driver be unpaid? As far as this is concerned, I don't believe so. But again, I don't think this comes down to actual regulations. I think this comes down to time and attendance and how you pay your drivers, because there's going to be a lot of people out there who only pay drivers based on the mile. A lot of our long-haul drivers pay their drivers only by the mile. So it really shouldn't have any impact on payroll unless you maybe your union bylaws say that you're only paying the drivers for on-duty time or drive time. In that case, keep in mind this is considered daily duty time. I'm sorry, it's considered weekly duty time and counted against the driver's daily duty as well. Sorry, it's counted as daily duty, not weekly duty. So that off-duty time counts against their 14. So it's not as though they've got now 14 and a half hours to perform their activities. They still only have those 14 hours. They still only have 11 hours of drive. But now they have to be taken off of the road for at least 30 minutes. And whether that impacts payroll or not, I don't believe matters. But again, it does for time and attendance purposes. Will drivers see if the 30-minute break is up on their OBC? So the display will show the break status. So again, I'm sorry, it'll show that they're in an off-duty status. It won't show that they're in a break unless you put that into the delays and breaks options within the host. Again, like I mentioned, it's probably the best way to have that timer so the driver knows that the 30 minutes has been met. Can Zeta be adjusted for specific state hours of service regulations? So I think this is a little bit more of a general question, but yes, within the hours of service settings, there is a section where you can put in your intrastate rules if your operation supports the intrastate rules, the intrastate regulations. there's a question here where it just states in the regulations, if you take 2 hours in the passenger seat and take 10 hours in the berth, the 2 hours would now count against the 14. Keep in mind the 2 hours, depends on when they happen. So if the driver takes 10 hours in the sleeper berth, he has achieved his reset. And the regulations state specifically that in order for the driver to take off duty in the passenger seat, in order for that to not count, and that's how they word it, in order for that to not count against their duty time, it has to be less than 2 hours or 2 hours or less, and it has to be adjacent to a sleeper berth segment of 8 hours, of at least 8 hours, but less than 10. So it specifically states at least 8 hours or less than 10. So if it's more than 10, if they get 10 hours or greater in the sleeper berth, what they've just done is they've invalidated any adjacent 2 hours, any adjacent time off duty in the passenger seat. Now, it wouldn't necessarily impact their current day. It would impact their previous day. But again, because they weren't driving, it doesn't cause a violation. It's daily duty time, but keep in mind it's also weekly duty time. And we have to do that. That's what the regulations state, is that it has to be at least 8 hours, but less than 10 hours in sleeper berth. So it does count against the previous day's 14, if that's when that segment was taken. If that driver hops into the passenger seat after 10 hours in the sleeper berth, they're immediately accruing daily duty time, because again, it can't be adjacent to 10 or greater hours in sleeper berth. We will not be able to get to all these questions. It looks like a lot of them have come in here since we've completed our session. So we've got just a few more minutes, and we will answer a few more, but all the questions have been logged, and we will make sure that they are answered in the FAQ. But also I think what we'll do is try to get these answered within the next couple of days and sent out to the group that attended as well. So the next question is, will a violation occur if the drivers take 27, like for example, less than the full 30-minute? Yes, the driver continues to occur. The violation continues to occur until they have met a full 30 minutes off duty. Anything short of that, whether it's 1 minute or 29 minutes, it's not 30 minutes, and so therefore, if they drive again, they're still in violation because they haven't met the full reset. If a driver works for only 6 hours in a day, he doesn't have to take the break. That is absolutely correct. If a driver only works 6 hours a day, maybe they only drive for the first 6 hours a day, and then they come into the warehouse for the next 6 hours, or maybe they work a full day, but they only drive for half the day, first half of the day. Same scenario. Yeah, they won't need to take a break as long as they're not going to drive after 8 hours since they came on duty. So if he only works for 6 hours, or if again, like he drives for half a day and then works in the warehouse for the second half of the day, as long as they don't drive without taking the break, they won't have a violation. Can the 30-minute be taken in the sleeper if in use? So the 30-minute break, the regulation, I believe, states that the 30-minute break has to be taken within 8 hours of his last off-duty or sleeper berth status of at least 30 minutes. So considering sleeper berth, in order for it to actually be applied as sleeper berth, has to be at least 2 hours or 8 hours, depending on which segment they're taking. So obviously that does meet the 30-minute the 30-minute quote-unquote off-duty or sleeper berth break. So yes, they can take that 30-minute break in the sleeper, but again, it's not necessarily considered sleeper unless it's at least 2 hours, because again, driver might as well just put themselves off duty, probably better off if they're only going to be doing it for 30 minutes. If a driver uses the 16-hour big day, would he have to take 2 breaks? Absolutely. Absolutely would have to take 2 breaks, unless he's back before that 16th hour and he timed his first one appropriately. So it's very likely that he would have to take 2 if he's using the 16-hour big day. But if he's using that 16-hour big day to extend himself a half an hour or extend himself maybe 45 minutes or something like that, he may only still have to take one in that day. But again, just keep in mind that they have to happen within 8 hours of each other. So again, if he works that full 16, it's going to be impossible or close to impossible for him not to. But again, if he's extending that 2 hours, he's already losing 30 minutes. So he might be losing an hour just from a calculation of how much time that driver can be on the road. Because again, with the 16-hour rule, they have to be back and off duty before that 16th hour is up. Will the warning only be available on the web-based time clock? And like I mentioned before, I think this should be on the PC-based time clock as well. So we'll get that again. Contact your client manager or support, depending on if you have a client manager or not. And the next question I think is the same. The drivers use Motorola scanners in association with Xata. Scanners start their Xata clock and end their Xata clock. How will that affect their on-duty time? So just like they get today, when a driver tries to clock in too soon, they haven't gotten their full daily reset or they haven't gotten their full weekly reset, they get that warning message that says they're trying to come on duty too early. Do you want to continue anyway? And it tells them why. So the same thing is going to be mentioned whether you're using the web-based time clock or the PC time clock or the microdisplay or the CDU or your scanners. All that knowledge is in the OBC. It's not on the display. So the OBC is what's driving all that content, and therefore that's what you will. That's where you'll see it. So very similar to how it's being used today. It looks like there's probably about maybe 10 more questions, because I know you guys have had a lot more questions as we've completed here. So there's about 10 more questions. It is officially 11 o'clock Central Time, so we will be ending the call now. But again, these have been logged. We will get answers to them and get them out to this group here in the next couple of days or so, as well as getting this recording posted. So I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance today. Thank you very much for all of your questions as well. Like I said, we'll get these answered. We'll get them out to you. If you have additional questions, please contact us. Like I said, contact your client manager or contact support if you need to log some additional questions regarding this item. Like I mentioned, we will be posting this recording, and we will be having another session in early June. So if you are interested in maybe sending additional people from your organization to it or attending it again yourself, you will be able to do so. We will get invitations sent out or a notification sent out very, very soon, probably early part of next week. So thank you, everybody, for attending. And again, any other questions, let us know. Have a great day.